Um, Perfect. Thanks, Eileen. So I was at lunch with my brother-in-law recently, and I was telling him about this presentation. I mentioned that I'd be talking about the universal characteristics of photographs that may make them more memorable and interesting. And he said, "You can't predict what I'm going to like and not like." Well, he's right about that. But I didn't say I could predict what he's going to like. I said I can increase the chance that he'll find a picture more memorable or interesting. I've included a wide range of pictures in this presentation from a lot of different genres. I hope there's something in here for everyone, or that over the next hour, some of the things I'll talk about will reinforce what you already know and are already doing with your compositions. The idea of the title of this workshop, Intentional Composition, is to contrast it with unintentional composition, which is a little bit more like a car accident. I know some of my colleagues uh, sort of push back on me when I talk about intentionality because they say they like to be spontaneous and they don't think before they shoot. And I think that the only people who don't think before they shoot are people for whom it's become reflexive because they've internalized some of the things or many of the things that I'm going to talk about today. But regardless, the idea is that by being a bit more intentional, the idea is that we can increase the chance that our pictures will be interesting and memorable, regardless of the subject or the type of equipment that we use. I like taking pictures of a lot of different subjects. My pictures metadata shows me that about 75% of my keepers are taken at under 120 millimeters. In the old days, I used to carry around a big lens because somehow I thought that I needed it. And then I realized that my style, at least, didn't need it. So I stopped carrying big lenses. My main camera is a Nikon D850. I generally travel with a 24 to 120 f4 from Nikon. I also use a 35-1.8. And more recently, I've started enjoying using a 90 millimeter macro 2.8 from Tamron. It's a terrific lens. This picture, in fact, was taken with my point and shoot, which is one of my favorite carry arounds, my Canon G7X. It's a fast 1.8 to 2.8 lens. It's my pocket camera. Uh, I tend to shoot in aperture priority, but in nature, I'm generally ready with a faster shutter speed. The woman on the jetty is my wife. I call her the walker. She walks faster than I do and does her thing, and I watch and wait, and I often am able to take pictures of her from behind, which serves the style of photography that I have, which is a lot of pictures that engage the viewer and invite the viewer to envision themselves as the person in the picture. You'll see her a few more times during this presentation. Um, Painters get to take their time, starting with the blank canvas. Photographers have to react quickly, often instinctively, and decide what to include and what not to include in their composition, and understand that what the camera sees is not actually exactly what the viewer will perceive. It's a distinction I like to make, and I will tonight a couple of more times. The idea that what the camera sees is not exactly what the viewer will perceive. And what is perception? It's the brain's attempt to search for the best interpretation of what the eyes see. Photographers and artists, I think in general, benefit from having a set of strategic ideas and skills that help translate the gap between what the eye sees and what your brain perceives. In photography, we have this opportunity because what we know in psychology is the eyes take in a whole lot more than ever reaches our consciousness. About 99% of what our eyes take in remains in the unconscious. And what I'm hopefully going to do today is help us increase a little bit more of that percentage moving it to the conscious level, particularly for us as photographers, when we're looking through the lens, and also having the viewer in mind when we're taking pictures. The idea that if we can be a little more intentional, we can bridge the gap between what remains in the unconscious and what moves into the conscious realm.
Like the full screen at the bottom.
I don't want full screen.
Oh, then just leave it. Just get out. Yeah.
What's on this slide might be obvious, but I think it's worth reviewing quickly. Pictures are created to be viewed, right? No kidding. Is there someone who might want to mute themselves?
Yeah, that's Harvey. Harvey, can you mute yourself?
So pictures are created to be viewed. So I'm going to make this distinction and then move on to the main part of the presentation. The picture on the left was taken in Guatemala. And when we think about what the viewer perceives, we look at that picture and the first thing we think is, oh, maybe who is that man? Is that his dog? What town is this? What country is this? And so forth. And we say that picture may have a story to tell. But equally as important is the fact that the viewer may be looking at this and it may conjure a memory, an experience, a life event in the mind of the viewer, which really has nothing to do with the picture except that the picture triggered that thought in the mind of the viewer. So we'll keep these two ideas in mind as we're going through my presentation, with the idea being that you can't control the viewer, but you can influence them. And that's what we're going to try and do through some of the ideas I've got here today. So this scene grabbed my attention. It's a clear subject, no distractions, it's contrasty, it's surprising. What was my intention? To create a picture with some interpretive ambiguity, maybe some confusion. Someone asked me if I knew who the cancer patient was. If you haven't figured it out already, this is really a picture of a storefront in a women's clothes store. And the mannequins didn't have any wigs on. And there were 3 mannequins, one behind the other. I like taking pictures of mannequins. They never mind having their picture taken and they don't ask for money. So I had intentionality when I was thinking about and looking at this picture. My intention Geiger counter was buzzing when I saw this woman and her dog up in Maine. My intention was to capture the relationship between the woman and her dog. That's what caught my perceptual Geiger counter. The possible story, archetypes and emotions, the archetype of the human-animal relationship of caring. It's a clean subject, no distractions, human connection. I'll admit that you'll see the picture on the left didn't serve me, but the main picture I thought was better. I gave a little whistle, and when I whistled, the dog's ears perked up, the woman turned around, and I took the picture. I ended up going over to her. We shared some stories. She liked the pictures. I took more pictures with her phone and sent them to her. She's a doctor at the University of Vermont. It was a nice experience. Sometimes I say taking people pictures is a contact sport. I'm a chemical engineer by training, although I do have a marketing degree. I spent many years helping clients reverse engineer their manufacturing processes so they can better see why things aren't working as planned. This presentation is my attempt to reverse engineer the question, why are some pictures more memorable and interesting than others? Lots of books give us all sorts of tools and techniques and rules as if it's a mechanical process. There are a lot of prescriptive ideas, do this, do that. Mostly tactics related to things like aperture and histograms and all that stuff, left brain stuff. But rules never encouraged me to think, and more importantly, to feel, which I think is an important part of photography. So I made a long list of the rules, the do's and don'ts, the techniques, and then I curated them. I grouped them in a bunch of different ways, and the list got distilled down to 5 main strategic ideas that work for me. These ideas here in front of you. the idea of what is your subject and be clear about its essence. That memorable pictures tend to be ones that connect with the viewer. Then the idea of graphic tension, which I'll explain, creating distinctions and differentiation in your compositions. And lastly, maybe the more common one that we all think about a lot is managing the viewer's eye. You'll pardon this graphic, but as an engineer and management consultant, I couldn't resist. I think all the strategic ideas on the left are worth keeping in mind all the time, at least at some level, right? Many of the tactics, however, apply to multiple strategic ideas. Tactics like depth of field, check your borders, looking for diagonals to add energy, interpretive ambiguity, leading lines, all that stuff, right? These are the tactics are the things that we often read about, but I have rarely found that the list on the left is often mentioned, and that's why I have found it helpful in my work. So let's go and take a look at the first of my 5 strategies. What is your subject? You know, I don't want to be insulting to anybody, but how many times have we seen pictures people show us and we look at the picture and our first thought is, what were they taking a picture of? Why again did they take that picture? Particularly, of course, family and friends showing us vacation pictures, you know? So what is your subject? Be present with your subject, slow down. It's very exciting. I do a lot of traveling. And it's really easy to move to have the sort of the pressure to move quickly, especially when your wife or significant other is with you and they're saying, come on, let's go. What's your perception about the main subject? What makes it worth photographing? And spend at least a second or two asking yourself, what's the essence of the subject, so that's what I try and capture. So the subject. Here I have a simple subject. I think it's the oldest picture in my portfolio. Simple subject, straight portrait, lends itself to being clear subject. Capturing the essence is more challenging. So this is a poor boy in China, in a small town outside of Guilin in the south, trying to capture the moment, the expression, the reflection of the reality for this young boy. Clean border patrol, simple composition, the perspective of the boy looking up, the eyes looking up adds a certain energy and maybe a little pathos to the picture. His mother was actually holding his hand as I took the picture, and I did give her some money for the picture, which she was asking for. So clear subject, I was trying to capture the essence of this boy. Now here's a picture subject. We all take these kinds of pictures. Street scene in Peru, in Pisac. And you know, we could sit for a few minutes, but I'm not going to. And you know, you would say, "Well, Ray, what were you taking a picture of?" Well, it's a street scene. It's colorful. It's exotic, right? People are dressed in different kinds of clothing. But what's the essence of this picture? Is it the guy in the white beard on the right? Is it the woman in the hats on the left? It's confusing, and it's difficult to say to the viewer, that's what I wanted you to look at. But when I turned around, I saw this picture. Opposite extreme. It's certainly sometimes bigger seen is better, you know, but overly cute can sometimes also tip into a hackneyed or trite sort of picture. But here we have the goat under the girl's arm, traditional dress. These little kids were actually begging for money on the street. When we sort of know that, there's a certain ambiguity of meaning and interpretation. Although maybe a little overly cute, it's also a poignant picture and a cultural commentary. I felt that when I think about my trip to Peru, this picture captured more of the essence of, you know, what is the Peru than that general street scene. And it reminds me of this quote from one of my favorite authors, Rudolf Arnheim. He wrote, "The brain craves the ability to focus its attention and will search for the object of its intention. A photograph of a homogeneous pattern of leaves might be interesting, but the brain will frankly find it boring. There's no point of attention." And in yoga, they talk about another day, another downward dog, which is the standard pose you start with every class. And this just reminds me of that. You know, you can't say it enough. What are you taking that picture of and why? Right? Rudolf Arnheim reminds me of that. We all go to the beach. So what are we going to take a picture of? The beach? How many pictures of the beach and sunsets down in Cape May can we take pictures of? And so, what is the essence of the beach? The beach is about walking on the beach. It's about playing on the beach. And of course, I'm sitting there thinking, how am I going to get a different kind of picture down in Rehoboth? And along comes this bouncing ball. So, be ready. There's this bouncing ball. I thought for me, when I think about the beach, maybe this is a better picture of the beach and the energy and the essence of the beach than some of those broad-based beach pictures. Clean subject, good isolation, no distractions, clean border, and so forth. Flower shots. How many pictures of flowers do we see? So, just because it's a flower doesn't mean you can't have intention about what are you trying to communicate. So my intention here was to shoot not just flowers, but I had an idea of looking for birth in the garden. So I went in with that idea, and it was in the back of my mind. And then I saw these blooms, and I thought, okay, use my 90 millimeter macro. And by the way, if you really want to get your head around depth of field, walk around with a macro lens for a week and take close up of things like flowers, and you'll never forget your lessons about depth of field again. So I thought clear subject, capturing the essence of this flower with intentionality. So many swans, so many same pictures of swans. If I go to Cape May, maybe a lot of you do, and sometimes we tend not to take pictures of things that there's a lot of because they're not rare, that maybe they're not interesting. I love the swans, but it is a challenge to get a picture that's different, that captures their essence. The picture on the left, the little one, that's the picture we see all the time, the swans swimming around. And then I'm sitting, I'm waiting. And finally in front of me, these two swans at the same time put their head in the water. And they got the swan in the back, and it was like, oh my God, this is perfect. And I grabbed the picture. My brother looked at the picture and he said, how'd you get those swans to do that? So, whoops. There we go. So intentionality here was waiting, and asking myself, what is the essence of a swan? The neck, the ability to stretch the neck, to bend the neck, right? And express that in a different way. Again, with flowers, how many flower pictures have we seen that are maybe more like the one on the left, the little one? It's an interesting flower. It's pretty small. I took this with the macro lens, but I kept looking at this flower and moving around it. And finally, I came upon this perspective of the picture, which felt like it captured the essence of this flower. It was such a sexy little flower, and I thought, okay, maybe this is a much better representation, an intentional representation of this flower. And when we go to places that are iconic, like the Bass Harbor Lighthouse in Maine, in Acadia Park, some of you may have been there, you can't not take a picture of the lighthouse. That's the picture in the upper right. But how many millions of pictures are there of the Bass Harbor Lighthouse? With the sun setting, without the sun setting, I'm kind of like, who cares at this point? So I go there and I look around, and when you turn around from the Bass Harbor Lighthouse and look in the opposite direction, these are the rocks that you see. And the question is, the rocky coast of Maine, right? What is the essence of the rocky coast of Maine? It's not the Bass Harbor Lighthouse. It's those rocks, and it's the weather-beaten energy that communicates itself when you look at those rocks. And I thought, okay, I got a clear subject, I have intention, and maybe, just maybe, I captured the essence of the rocky coast of Maine. Again, a vacation shot. The picture on the left is the scene in Sicily. It's a city beach. It's a very narrow little strip of sort of rocky, small rocky beach. And you can see the Sicilians sitting down there, laying down there in the sun. But that's as far as I'm concerned, that's a vacation snapshot. What is the essence of Sicily, right? In the summer, it's young lovers, right? So if you see the staircase, the top of the staircase, there's a road, there's cars parked. I was standing at the top of the staircase looking straight down on the beach. And I thought, can I capture the essence of this beach? And there it was, right under my nose, this young couple down on the beach. And I thought, got it. Oh, this is good. I'm ready. Egrets, like the swans. Yeah, there's so many egrets all around, but what is the essence of an egret? Well, again, the neck, like with the swans, but they're huge, their wings, and when they fan them out, this is a male egret in a rookery. The little female egret is hovered down below on the bottom. Um, this egret was showing off their neck and their wings, almost human-like qualities, and the eyes. I thought compositionally, this picture has also strong diagonals that add energy to it. So I thought, all right, I got some intentionality here. Maybe I've captured the essence of an egret. But then I'm also reminded that there are a lot more pictures out there to take than just pictures of animals and people. And it's almost as if two parts of our brain get engaged when we look at certain kinds of pictures. Some pictures are very sort of intellectual, like architectural pictures. I wouldn't generally call them emotionally laden, like the lovers on the beach. And some pictures are. So there's an intellectual left brain and there's emotional right brain. I happen to find that pictures that are more memorable and interesting are ones that are in the green zones here. So if we can get some emotional content, and if we can get at least emotional content, and if we can get both intellectual and emotional content, all the better. About the idea of thinking and feeling when it comes to pictures. And I just really quickly spend a few minutes looking at some pictures and asking ourselves, is this more an intellectual picture or an emotional feeling picture? Here we have the wall of a house, tree out front, nice colors, a window. It certainly suggests a human presence, has some graphical features, maybe some mood. To my eye, it's a bit more right brain than like the two lovers on the beach, but that's okay. I'm just getting us sort of into this idea of making this somewhat arbitrary distinction between left and right brain kind of picture. Here's an abstract. You may recognize it as sand on the beach with the sun later in the afternoon. It's interesting at an intellectual level, maybe aesthetically attractive. I'm not sure I'd say that I connect with it at a personal human level, but it's still aesthetically interesting. Here, graphically interesting, maybe engenders some curiosity. It's a tight perspective on some desert plants. It got the nice curve, so aesthetically attractive. But again, maybe not much emotional engagement. Here we have one that begins to maybe add some emotion because it's maybe a picture that we can sort of relate to. If any of us have been to a market where they're offering, fresh squeezed orange juice, it's colorful. You can almost feel the ice on top of the juice. I've certainly bought fresh squeezed orange juice before, so it has some of that connection that you'd think about for the viewer as a photographer. Will my viewer connect with the picture? And that's exactly what I wanted to lead into here, to make that distinction between pictures that connect with the viewer at some emotional level and pictures that maybe not so much. So the next principle is connecting with the viewer to make pictures more memorable and interesting. And specifically, connecting with the viewer in a way that finds a universal theme in a particular picture. And I'll talk more about that. There are obviously many emotions that can be conjured in a photograph. Here are a handful of the classic ones: sadness, anger, surprise, fear, happiness. Right? These are a series of emotions, and we'll look at a variety of pictures and we'll ask ourselves, do they connect with the viewer at an emotional level? As well, does the picture connect with the viewer at an archetypical level? Some of us may be familiar with the concept of an archetype. Plato might have been the first one to think about archetypes. He called them forms. Carl Jung talked about archetypes. And he said that ultimately archetypes are the fundamental unit of our unconscious mind. And they affect us all in the same way. When we see two friends walking down the street, we understand what friendship is. When we see a person on their deathbed, we understand what that is archetypically. We understand what a baby who was just born in their mother's arms. We understand that as an archetype of birth. We see a teacher and a student. We understand that relationship archetypically. And so I'm going to go through a handful of pictures here and asking ourselves, do these pictures connect with the viewer? And in my mind, connection will also make a picture more interesting and memorable. My host in my Havana Airbnb. Hostess, host, triggers human connection, the joy, the emotion of this picture. And she's also a caregiver. Our love of pets is triggered. The bird is hanging on the woman's dress, almost pulling her dress down, which is sort of funny. So we have humor here, the woman's smile. This picture reflexively puts a smile on my face that connects with me, right? I'm engaged almost at a physiological level with this picture. I don't tire of looking at this picture. And a shallow depth of field also helps, just oh, by the way. Connection. The picture on the left, I photoshopped out the three boys. And if you can look at the picture on the left and the picture on the right, and then ask yourself, which one do you connect more with as a viewer? The picture on the left is aesthetically pleasing, right? We know psychologically that our brains are programmed to like water. We love boats, the distance, the mountain. It's an okay picture. But to my eye, at least, you add the boys, and suddenly I've got a human connection. I have a transformed picture in my mind. Three main elements, by the way, just from a compositional standpoint: the boys, the boat, the mountains. It's sort of like a triangle, and our eyes go to the corners of the triangle around the picture. Roland Barthes, a well-known author, philosopher, wrote that the creation of meaning in an image requires that the image cease to be a representation or an object and becomes more of an unfolding experience or an event. And I'd like to think that a picture like this is an unfolding experience that makes it likely to be more memorable. A much simpler picture. How many of us have had vinyl chairs growing up? The red vinyl, the yellow foam coming through. It conjures the archetype of aging, time gone by, past, present, future. Maybe the emotions of melancholy, sadness, all depending on our personal memories and experience. The chair appears to still be in use. In fact, I'm pretty sure some Greek guy was about to sit in it shortly after I took this picture. It's an example of a compositional strategy called the pertinent negative. And the idea is that there's something missing, and we know what's missing. It's the person who sits in the chair. The pertinent negative adds to the connectedness of the picture to the viewer. Connecting, back to connecting. Trying not to be intrusive. I'm walking down the beach, waiting for the right moment, looking for the best angle, knowing I only have a few seconds before the boy looks up and ruins the picture. The archetypes of childhood, playing on the beach in the sand, being creative as a child, feelings of joy, peace, the focus like only a child can do sitting on the beach. Of course, the reflection of the boy in the water is critical to the composition. And the timing of the shot as the sand is just dropping out of his fingers. Connection, creating pictures that you connect with, more memorable and interesting. We can connect with flowers too, but it's harder. Here I thought, if it weren't for the wind blowing these flowers over, it's almost as if the flowers were communicating the energy associated with strength and endurance and perseverance, human qualities, We anthropomorphize when we see pictures like this. And to me, if I can't do that, then the picture is less likely to be memorable. So hopefully a picture like this, because of its energy and our ability to relate to it in human terms of perseverance and strength, might make it more memorable and interesting. Connecting. You know, we look at an old man, my Uncle Max, actually my great Uncle Max, who passed away some years ago. He was about 98 in this picture. And we look at his eyes and, oh boy, you know, it conjures so much about pensive moments that we've experienced. We look into Max's eyes and wonder what he's thinking. It draws us in. Whereas the picture on the right, all we see is the back of the man with the dog. So on the picture on the left, we relate to Uncle Max directly and we wonder about Uncle Max. On the right, we have the opportunity as a viewer to be drawn in and envision ourselves sitting on the beach with the dog. It's a different kind of connectedness, but connecting nevertheless. Here's a more traditional kind of connecting. The viewer's eye goes back and forth between the three elements. The orange is the mother, I assume the mother, the two girls. Emotions and archetypes, the mother working hard, the kids being young without a care, playing, the mother being the caregiver, earning a living, and so forth. But we connect with the picture, hopefully making it more memorable. And how can't we connect to this? Sisters, they happen to be my neighbor's kids, and I've taken pictures of them their whole lives. The essence of the subject, we got it. The archetypes of youth and innocent growing up, best friends, our own recollection of childhood stories. We connect, we relate, we feel, we smile, right? And maybe not as happy of a picture, but maybe we connect nevertheless. The pertinent negative, somebody was using those clothespins to hang clothes on a line. Maybe when we were growing up, we had clothes lines out in the backyard. Maybe elicits the story of farm life, the archetypes associated with hard work. The old fence suggests maybe better times in the past, maybe emotions of sadness and melancholy. But, you know, all of that adds to our ability to connect with the picture. A simpler kind of connection here. We've all been to barbers or hair salons while walking down the street in San Miguel de Allende in Mexico. And there was this guy, you know, he's having his haircut. It's just an interesting picture. And here we have the universal and the particular. You know, the universal of we all get our haircut, but this is a particular picture of a man getting a haircut. The universal and the particular. I love reading. This picture was attractive to me and my wife. I have it hung up in my living room, fairly large. It may not be interesting to other people, but here's an example of where if it relates to the viewer's own life experience, then it's a good picture and memorable. And of course, this picture is particularly interesting to us because it's clearly, or appears at least to be in another country, in this case Morocco, conjuring the archetypes of family and caring, maybe the emotions of joy and happiness. It invokes some curiosity, questions about culture, dress, men and women, so it draws the viewer in. It took me some years before I realized it looks like a part of the man's finger is missing. And of course, on the right, the woman who puts her arm on the shoulder of the other woman makes this picture, really finishes this picture from an emotional standpoint. Connecting. One of the sisters a few years later, her first horse competition, you know, what can you say? This was the horse that she was about to get on. And we're looking at this picture, words like courage, fortitude, confidence come to mind, making the picture hopefully more memorable. And who can not be moved when seeing this picture of old friends, maybe best friends forever, walking down the street? I'll just say that I trolled these guys and I waited until the umbrellas were all on the ground at the same time. And I wanted separation between the umbrellas and their legs. And I wanted separation between their own legs. So it looked like I had 6 legs and 3 umbrellas. And I did my best. Connecting. we can never predict exactly what a viewer is going to think when we look at a picture of ours. But if different viewers have different interpretations of our pictures, maybe all the better. Sally Mann said it best. She said, if it doesn't have ambiguity, don't bother to create the picture. It's got to have something peculiar in it or it's not interesting. And that's what we're talking about today, creating interesting pictures. And Leonard Bernstein maybe said it better. A work of art does not answer questions, it provokes them. And its essential meaning is in the tension between contradictory answers. Ambiguity and connection. I connect with this picture because of the horror of it. I know other people connect with this picture because it looks like dinner to them, waiting to be chopped up and put into a octopus, marinade. So the ambiguity of it creates maybe a picture that's more interesting. Here I was down on South Street with the club, my club, Mainline Camera Club. We were invited into Cannuli's Freezer down on the Italian market. I was sort of horrified. A lot of my colleagues thought it was really funny. I didn't think it was so funny when I saw this picture. So the ambiguity of it, some people might look at this and think it's dinner. I looked at it and I was like, maybe it is time to become a vegetarian. So ambiguity also creates more interesting pictures. So connection. Let's go to the next piece, graphic tension. So we got a couple down, graphic tension. What is graphic tension? Maybe the best example of graphic tension is the rule of thirds. I always ask myself, why does the rule of thirds work? Generally speaking, it works. Well, it's because it's forcing the main subject and its essence to be off center, which creates a little bit of imbalance. And the psychologists tell us that imbalance creates a more interesting imprint on our psychological neural connections. So non-symmetry, even motion perception, feelings of imbalance, diagonals, and so forth, different perspectives all create a degree of graphic tension, which I think creates more interesting pictures. Simple concept. Balance is a powerful visual reference. Lacking balance is disorienting. But that very disorientation is effective visual technique for triggering a response in the viewer. In other words, increasing the likelihood your picture will be more memorable. Graphic tension, right? Here it's literally, this guy's off balance. And you almost look at this picture and you kind of cock yourself sideways, imagining yourself with this guy in the boat. We got truncated boats. We know water is going up and down. So there's graphic tension in this picture. The diagonals help add energy as well. Graphic tension, straight telephone pole. The weather has obviously torn this tree asunder all the way over to the right. So there's this sort of tension. We wonder what kind of weather this must be up there to have caused that tree to be the way it is. Now I'm going to ask you to hold this image in your mind. You ready? I'm going to go to the next picture. I'm going to go to the next picture now. You ready? Now I'm going to go back.
Good night.
I'm going to go back.
You take your drugs?
I took my medicine.
Good.
Took my medicine.
Okay.
Chat.
Uh,
At least I remember that I took them.
what's happening here? Oh, okay. So can everyone hear me okay?
Bye. Good night.
Oh, Linda, I think you need to mute yourself, Linda.
Okay, sorry.
Okay. So I'd invite you to reflect in your own mind which one of these felt more comfortable, or I'll put the word in quotes, right to you. Does this one feel right, or does this one feel right? And what's sort of interesting is that some of the psychologists have suggested to us, not always, but oftentimes, our brain has a left-right orientation to the way we like things. Our brains find it orderly when we look left to right. So the invitation for you is just to experiment with that in your own compositions and see what happens. Here's another example. Here's a left-weighted composition, and I just flipped it in Photoshop. They have a very different feeling, right? The tension, in a sense, in them is very different, even though all I did is flip left, right. So have fun in your own compositions in sort of driving graphic tension in your compositions to make them more interesting. Here, the tension is from the girl leaning down. I'm leaning down. This is a Christmas parade. I jumped in the middle of the street. The kids were initially on the left a little uncertain about who I was and what I was doing. And then they got in the game with me, and we had fun together. And they were smiling and having fun. Her leaning down creates tension. Her body language creates tension. Look at her feet. There's tension. So there's a lot of energy and what I call graphic tension in this picture that might indeed make it more memorable. A different kind of tension here. I was fortuitous to have this single piece of cobweb, which almost seems like it's pulling those flowers over, creating that sense of tension in the picture as well. Just a little tip on flower photography. Since flowers show up at all different angles, when you're shooting them, if you can deliberately tilt them and create more graphic tension in your compositions with flowers, I encourage you to play with that if you haven't already. Here's a different kind of graphic tension, contributed by the main subject, the bride. I was down on the beach. This couple were having their picture taken by their wedding photographer. And the wedding photographer was motioning to the woman to go further out on the rocks. She looked like she had a look of horror on her face. I'm not sure what the groom was thinking. Of course, her hand position, her splayed out fingers, the dress up in the air suggests the wind is blowing. Indeed, it was. It was freaking cold. It was so cold, it was like 30 degrees and windy that day. I don't know how she did it. I wonder how that marriage is going these days. But I'd like to think I caught some graphic tension here. A different kind of graphic tension. Here's another example. I got in on it. This woman's boyfriend was taking her picture. I asked if I could get in on it. She was happy to have me do that. In fact, once I got in on it, she even got more animated, put her arms out, smiling. The tension of her graphic tension, her outstretched arms aligned with the mountains, her smile, the wind. I had a fast shutter speed captured, froze the dress. Then she's on a cliff. There's a possible sense of vertigo if you look closely at the picture. So graphic tension adds to this picture. Graphic tension, a lonely road. This road actually was tilted. I didn't have to tilt it. As you can tell by the buildings are straight, but the road is tilted. That was really helpful here. The diagonals are always good for graphic tension, adding energy to the picture as well. And here, like with the last picture, the sidewalk actually was tilted, as you can see by the lines of the brick and the building. So this picture is straight. The road was tilting down, creating a natural kind of tension. The man's arm up in the air, pointing, talking, their arms back. Body language also creates an energy, or what I like to call graphic tension in the picture. So these pictures of graphic tension as another principle, I think, makes pictures more memorable and interesting. Next principle, create distinction and differentiation. What we mean basically is that your main subject should stand out in a word, right? And how you make them stand out by having differential range of light values, making your main objects have good edges separate from other main objects, that your main objects, in other words, have separation. You can also create distinctions through object size differentials, through things in the foreground versus things in the background, and of course, gradients like depth of field. This is an example where depth of field is really just a technique that's part of a more interesting and larger strategy I call distinctions and differentiation. Let's take a look at some examples. Maybe just first to find it a little clearly. So what we mean is A distinction, differentiation, the state of being strikingly different from something else next to it. Right? Took this picture just a couple of months ago. If you a great place to hang out in a town is the church steps where I was here in this small town. And along comes this gentleman. It's a colorful town, but along comes this guy all dressed in white and a black hat and black shoes. And I just couldn't believe it. So my first thought was, oh my God, does he stand out? But now I got to make it happen in a picture. And then I saw the line down the middle of the street and I said, oh crap, if I don't capture him before he crosses that line, then I got a problem. So I needed the differentiation, distinction between the line in the middle of the street, the guy in the white. I wanted his legs separated, so I needed distinction between the two legs. I had people on the top of the picture. I got their legs spread apart, so I got differentiation and distinction. Here's a much simpler composition. Simple subject separation. I got lucky. I looked to my left. There he was. It looks like he's talking to a friend. His hands are out in front of him. His posture leaning forward adds graphic tension. The fact that it's a centered picture feels okay. I don't know that I have rule of thirds here, but you know, it's not a rule. It's just a thought. I have texture differentiation. I have a strong third dimension as well, and I have human connection. So this picture has a lot, for me at least. In fact, I have it. I also have this picture in my living room. Distinction and differentiation. With these kind of scenes, the fog down on the beach, I just have to keep watching and waiting. I kept walking as the people were walking. The fog kept changing. Sometimes the people were all grouped together, but I knew, you know, I need the people to be separated. I need their legs to be separated. I need some distinction and differentiation. The picture on the left, you know, it's sort of a nothing picture. Picture on the right, I think, is a better picture. This is an iconic location in Iceland. And I was hesitant to take it because of that, but I tried. I tried to make it different. And I thought, you know, let me make the cross in the foreground to be really the main story here and the church be the background as opposed to the main element. But I did have to raise my camera up high enough to get the cross so that it didn't overlap with the stone wall in the background, or I thought that would have been a problem. So I needed separation and distinction of my main elements. I also have three main elements. So from a managing the viewer's eye, I got the clouds, the cross, the church, and the viewer's eye goes around and around in this picture. This composition, you know, is just a reminder of how important depth of field can be in creating distinctions and differentiation. Were it not for the nice bokeh in the background, this flower would not have stood out as well. I have almost like, it feels really like it's a three-dimensional picture to me as a result. Distinctions and differentiation through depth of field in this case. And here depth of field also helps a lot. Nice background, a nice blurry background. And I was really close to this woman. And the fact that I was close using a fairly wide angle lens, that really helped her face and the shape of her face almost pop out of the picture, creating almost like a three-dimensional thing. You could see I took a number of pictures of her. The one on the left, not nearly as interesting. Here, again, it's depth of field, adding to my ability to have distinction and differentiation. When all the main elements are in the same focal plane, like this picture, I don't have depth of field as an issue to play with. So here, what I'm faced with is just the positioning of the musicians. And I got lucky. They all had a nice separation between them. And the woman on the right, just as I was taking this picture, took the horn out of her mouth. She looked up into the sky, and I thought, oh, good, that really helps the composition. A much simpler composition. Distinction, the distinction between the camel and the sand. I got high contrast, good subject separation. I got the suggestion of motion and energy, a little graphic tension in this picture. So, distinction and differentiation. And the fifth and final of the 5 strategies, managing the viewer's eye. We talk a lot about this one, but none of these strategies I think are they're all so important in a sense that it's sort of like it's worth remembering them and really bringing them to our consciousness. So how do we position the main elements in our composition with the intentionality of managing the viewer's eye? Motion perception helps to manage the viewer's eye. Leading lines is maybe one of the more common techniques. Diagonals is a common technique. We've talked about diagonals also as helping to add energy and graphic tension. Strong third dimension, that sense of depth, helps to manage the viewer's eye if you use it strategically. So every composition obviously has parts. Every part plays a role. Take the viewer on a trip through your composition and invite them to explore the whole of it. Take your viewer on a trip through your composition. If any of you have been to Jackson Hole, Jackson, Wyoming, you know that there's a field out there, and there's some old buildings that everyone takes a picture of. There's a classic barn out in Jackson that everyone photographs. I did not. I just couldn't bring myself to do it because everyone's been doing it. And there was this other house, and I thought, what is the essence of Jackson? It's not that barn, but it's the people who survived living in Jackson, Wyoming over the last 200 years in those difficult, particularly winter conditions. So I thought the outhouse, the symbol of fortitude in Jackson, Wyoming. Managing the viewer's eye, we have the larger element is the window on the right. Maybe that's where, in general, the viewer enters the picture. You can't always predict where the viewer will enter the picture, but let's say on the right, it's a little brighter, it's bigger. Then the angle of the windows bring the viewer's eye from the right to left. Maybe they rest on the outhouse in the distance, and then they go up to the mountains and then back again, sort of like a triangle, as the viewer moves through this picture. In this street photography picture, like the last picture, there are 3 main elements. In this case, the man on the right, the man in the middle, and the small group on the left. The main element, separation, was important here. I needed also a fast shutter speed. The diagonal of the stairs helps bring the viewer's eye through the picture. All the men are on the stairs, so that works. The diagonal brings energy to the picture. The man on the right is brighter than the others, so it invites the viewer's attention to start there and then move through the picture right to left. The tree at the top also seems to be pointing down to the man on the right, helping the viewer's eye. That was a little serendipitous. Okay. Managing the viewer's eye. We're taught that having 3 elements often forms a balanced composition. Here I have a 4th element. They're truncated off on the left, somewhat in the shadows, but it works, adds a bit of energy to the picture. The viewer is invited to enter the picture via the boy in the front, and then the viewer's eye quickly goes left and then goes right. The light really helps. The light on the boy's face in the back, the light on the boy on the left, and so the viewer's eye moves around this triangle essentially. It's when I look at this picture, sometimes I get emotional. I really wonder what's going on for these boys all these years later in Zambia. Here we have a classic line of sight composition. The road going off into the distance to a vanishing point on the horizon. The fact that it's a diagonal helps with the energy and composition. Telephone poles reinforce the diagonal, driving the viewer's eye down the road. And then all of a sudden, or maybe not, you notice the car on the left, and then your eye goes back and forth between the road and the car, and then you begin to wonder what's going on here. This was the Bahamas 4 years after Hurricane Dorian, and it still had not recovered. Managing the viewer's eye. First it seems like this picture is just a jumble of people, but our eyes quickly come to rest on the trumpeter on the right, his trumpet pointing to the crowd of people who are enjoying the music. It's really essential that the trumpeter is distinct and differentiated from the rest of the composition. Otherwise, it really would be a jumble. Then we see there's actually three elements. We got the trumpeter, we got the two dancers in the middle, we got the people on the left in the background. And so our eye goes back and forth, left to right. And then we notice there's a woman watching in the foreground, which maybe could be us. And that helps us also relate and connect to this picture, envisioning us standing there, listening to the music as well. Managing the viewer's eye. Here, the viewer sees this picture through the eyes of the two people in the water in the foreground. That's sort of where our eye goes initially. Partly, there are two nice differentiated people in that foreground in the water. And then we look up and we see the layers of this picture going off into the distance. This is the Blue Lagoon in Iceland, which I think right now is off limits due to volcanic activity. I'm glad I got there when I did. Yeah. So in managing the viewer's eye, we often tend to think left, right, or right, left, or into the picture. But I just wanted to remind myself that, managing the viewer's eye can be up, down too. Not often, but this is the library at Trinity College in Scotland, in Dublin. The circular staircase adds a bit of the pertinent negative. Right. Maybe, I suppose if I caught someone walking down the steps, maybe with their foot at the top of the picture, that would have been fun. But I didn't. I don't think these stairs were actually in use, but I'm not sure. The bright light coming in through the window in the background is really critical to the creating a distinct and differentiation with the staircase. Of course, the light also creates contrast with the books on both walls. So our eye goes to the books, to the staircase, back and around. Sometimes fun pictures show up in the darndest places. I was walking under the highway in Lisbon. This was the walk through to get across the highway. So you go down, and over and up. And I go down and I see these lights the way they were. And I said to my wife, just get the heck out of here. Just go. Just leave me alone for a couple of minutes. And I waited until basically I got what I wanted, which was that one guy in just the right position. And then he added to the picture and he put his hand on his head just as I was taking the picture. And also I caught his one foot off the ground, his leg separation. Anyway, I got lucky here. And it's a nice memory of Lisbon, not your typical memory of Lisbon. And then maybe one of my favorite pictures also, but this one's in my dining room at home, brings together many of the ideas that we've talked about tonight, capturing the essence of the subject. So here, a cafe, the two boys, maybe they've been friends for life, who knows, having a chat over a beer in the foreground, connecting with the viewer through that relationship, showing a degree of graphic tension through the motion and energy of the waitress in the middle of the picture, the boy pouring the beer, the body posture of the boy on the right. So we got some energy, some tension in here. I have just enough distinction and differentiation, I think, between the two boys in the foreground. The people in the background are a bit of a jumble, but that's sort of okay. That creates energy as long as the boys in the foreground had some separation. The boy on the right in particular has that the light glow over his body, and then behind him is a dark portion of the picture, so it serves to outline him a little bit. That's helpful. And then the composition brings the so managing the viewer's eye. We start in the foreground, looking at the two boys, and then we go back into the picture. I'll only mention too, this was taken with a crappy little point and shoot camera that I carried around at that time. This was a business project I had in Lyon. So You know, the best camera is the one you have with you. So, as I said, I'm pretty close to the end here. So, I came across this photographer some time ago and I read a book about him. I looked at a lot of his work. Luigi Ghiri, an Italian photographer who did a lot of work in the 70s, in the early days of color photography. And he said, photography is not mere duplication. Even the objects that seem to be entirely described by our own seeing, once represented in a photograph, may turn out to be like the blank pages of a book yet to be written. I don't know why that quote works for me. So that's how I'd like to end my presentation. Reviewing that I have found it helpful for me to keep in mind these 5 strategies. Reminding myself why I'm taking the picture and what is the essence of it. Looking to connect with the viewer either at an emotional level or an archetypical level. Creating a picture that has energy, tension of some kind in it through either imbalance or literally motion and movement, but something that's other than just a stationary picture. And that the main elements that I want to highlight have some distinction and differentiation. It's not just a jumble. And then I've thought about the orientation of those elements in the composition to manage the viewer's eye. This is a framework. It's one framework. There are lots of frameworks. I'm sure I've repeated many things that many of you already know and many already do. I can only hope that you found there are at least a few ideas that you can integrate into your work and or have simply reinforced in your own mind.